Hello everyone, welcome back to another brand new video, and today's video is gonna be a big one. Today, we will be ranking every episode of Jujutsu Kaisen from worst to best. I've seen the whole show through twice now, and various other episodes up to 5+ times, so I've really settled into my opinion about these episodes. I'm sure it'll end up changing in the future though. When Season 3 comes out and I inevitably redo this video, I'm sure some slots will change, but this is my list as of right now. I'm going to be including Jujutsu Kaisen 0 on this list, but if you think that it doesn't count, you can basically just ignore its placement. I'd also like to say that I think none of these episodes are bad. Jujutsu Kaisen really doesn't have any bad episodes. Yet. So yeah, the last place spot on this list is not a bad episode. It's just the episode I enjoy the least. Also, just to be clear, this video will be spoiling all of Jujutsu Kaisen Seasons 1 and 2 along with JJK 0, but I will not be spoiling anything from the manga past Season 2, so anime onlys are safe here. Last but not least, this is just my opinion. If you like an episode that I rank low or dislike an episode I rank high, that's completely okay. However, without further ado, this is every Jujutsu Kaisen episode ranked from worst to best. Number 48. Kyoto Sister School Exchange Event Group Battle 0. This episode is easily the worst of the series. Like I said earlier, none of these episodes are bad, but this is definitely the worst of the bunch. This episode is really just a prelude to the actual exchange event. I mean, it's called Group Battle 0 after all. This is a purely setup episode, and usually Jujutsu Kaisen does a good job of throwing in some memorable moments and fun scenes inside of their setup episodes to keep the attention. However, this episode does the worst job of that. There are still a few little standout moments, but not enough to bump this episode up from dead last. Those moments include Yuji's return to the group, the introduction of the Fraud Squad Kyoto students, Gakuganji ordering the Kyoto kids to kill Yuji, and Naked Mahito. That's basically it. I just genuinely feel this episode has the least to offer out of the bunch, so it comes in at 48 of 48. Number 47, Kyoto Sister School Exchange Event Group Battle 1. The Kyoto Goodwill arc is such an interesting arc in the grand scheme of things. It has the highest highs of Season 1, but also has the lowest lows of Season 1. It's probably my least favorite arc of the show so far. I very much enjoy moments of it, but it's a very inconsistent arc in terms of quality in my opinion, whereas the other arcs of Season 1, and especially Season 2, maintain a high quality throughout without a dip or a valley. Anyways, this episode begins the actual exchange event, and our main cast is let loose in the arena for the Spirit Bash race. This episode mainly consists of the first half of Yuji vs. Todo, and this is some good stuff. This is the episode where Todo and Yuji become the besto friendos, and that moment is easily the standout moment of the episode, as I love both Yuji and Todo, and this moment is very important to the rest of the series as it begins their relationship as the prime duo of Jump Jutsu. However, besides that, there isn't a whole lot else going on here. The fight between Yuji and Todo itself is on the lower end of fights in the series, and is more remembered for its relationship building and comedy. I can't even really name a standout moment in this one not involving Todo, so yeah, this one comes in near the bottom. Number 46, Girl of Steel. This episode is an interesting one. I initially had this episode a little higher, but I moved it down. This episode is the introduction to Nobara, and Nobara is a character I've criticized in the past. I really shit on her death scene in my review of Shabuya, but I honestly disagree with a lot of what I said there. I've since come around on it, and you'll see that episode way higher up on the list. That's the thing. That episode went from down to up, and this one from up to down. Law of equivalent exchange, I guess. Watching this episode back after the series is super weird. We see little flashes of Nobara's backstory, and then we don't learn the rest of it until Nobara literally dies. And that's 30 episodes from now, so you basically forget all about it. I also think it's a weird choice to have Nobara completely fumble her first fight. I understand that it's to show how different curses are in Tokyo compared to the countryside, and she still ends up exercising the curse in the end, but if Yuji isn't sent in on this mission, Nobara herself or a little kid would end up dying, and that's not the greatest intro to a character in my opinion, but hey, it is what it is. I still think this episode is good though, those are just minor complaints. I find a lot of humor in Gojo and Megumi this episode. Every time they cut back to them outside, they have something funny to say. Also, this episode is just kind of a bore on a rewatch, as this is basically just intro stuff, so it ranks low on my list. Number 45, Rian Suca. This is probably my first big hot take of the video, but I'm not huge on the premiere. I can confidently say that of the shonens I've seen so far, this is the first episode that has gripped me the least. I think it's a completely fine premiere, but nothing really jumps out to me about it either. We do have some standout moments though. Yuji's grandfather's death and Yuji eating Sukuna's finger, complete with Sukuna awakening, is all some amazing stuff. However, the rest of this episode is just very average to me. We spend some of our time meeting Yuji's occult club buddies, and they do not matter at all. And it's also kind of funny how they get attacked and it's almost entirely glossed over, but that's an episode 2 problem, not an episode 1 problem. Anyways, we also meet Megumi in this episode, and despite the slander and the hate, he remains one of my favorite characters of the series, and I think his intro scene of finding the missing Sukuna finger is actually pretty funny. I also think this episode's pacing is a bit of an issue. We never really have time to breathe. We instantly start with the show telling us Yuji is up for execution. We meet him and his friends, he beats his coach in a competition, he visits his grandpa who then dies like 2 minutes later, and then Megumi immediately shows up and tells him his friends are in danger, and we head straight into an action sequence that ends with the King of Curses coming back to life. This is some insane breakneck pacing, and it just doesn't work for me in this particular episode, especially when I'm being introduced into a new world and I'm trying to learn and get invested. Number 44, JUJUTSU Koshan. I don't care if it's blasphemy, but I really enjoy the baseball episode. I can't justify putting it any higher than this considering the absolute bangers we have ahead, but this episode will never fail to put a smile on my face. I'm also just a big fan of character building, and that's exactly what this episode is. It's just a nice little breath of fresh air where we watch the students have some competitive fun and we learn more about them. I love the little fact cards that all the students get, my favorite being Panda's, his saying that he wants to punch a zebra someday. Kinda sick. I also just love the comedy in this one. The comedic timing on Maki hitting a home run straight into Momo's glove while she's just chilling in the sky is great. It's also funny how you can see Megumi has demon dogs out during the baseball game in the background, which is just inherently funny. What I love about this episode even more is how the baseball game contributes to two of my favorite characters in the show, Megumi and Mekamaru. Gojo brings up Megumi's sacrifice bunt to him and is brought up before Megumi pops his domain expansion in the future. The baseball game is also brought up by Miwa talking to Mekamaru after Mahito kills him in Season 2, with her talking about seeing him in person sometime because she was disappointed in him just being a pitching machine during the baseball game. It's amazing that something as simple as a fun baseball game can serve not only as that, but character growth for some of our other characters. Number 43. Sage. This is another perfectly good episode. A majority of this one is the fight between Megumi and Kamo, and this is a perfectly good fight. It's a fight that is fun at the time, but then Choso in Season 2 decides to say, yeah, fuck all that, this is what a good blood manipulation fight looks like, and then just blows this fight out of the water. I still do enjoy this fight though, but what I don't enjoy is Kamo's constant yapping throughout. Bro is trying to trauma dump his backstory on Megumi, and to be honest, I do not care. My favorite part of this episode actually has nothing to do with this fight. My favorite moment is the reveal of Hanami being here at the exchange event. I like how we see the grade 2 curse emerge from behind the tree, and then it suddenly dies and out steps Hanami. It's such a genuinely scary oh shit moment. This is the episode where the exchange event officially gets invaded by the curses and curse users. We see Juzo lower the veil and Gojo and the others head in to stop him, but that's about it for this one. It's just an all-around solid episode. Number 42, Shabuya Incident, Gate Closed. This is our first episode of Season 2 on today's list, and it's the season finale. I previously said in my Shabuya review that I thought this episode was a bit underwhelming, and I do mostly still agree with that. It seems that a lot more of the fallout and resolution from Shabuya is being saved for Season 3, and that's completely fine, and it does make sense, but ending the season with this insane fucking lore dump is kinda crazy. The first 10 minutes of this episode is some of the most hard to follow lore the series has presented up to this point. Yuki and Pseudo-Geto are just talking about Tengen, Jujutsu, barriers, idol transfiguration, and it genuinely takes multiple viewings to understand. We then get the moment of Pseudo-Geto using idol transfiguration to transform sorcerers and vessels all across Japan, which is a good moment, and then he just dips. Fair enough, I guess. Then we get another exposition dump explaining how Japan is now a ghost town and the evacuation process and all this other stuff. The last 5 minutes of this episode are really good though, and that's all thanks to the return of Ogotsu. Yuta shows up, saves a little girl, and then we see the higher-ups' reactions to Shabuya and their bogus-ass laws that they enacted, one of which being Yaga's execution, which is just the nastiest stray of all time. But ending the season on Yuta saying he'll kill Yuji Itadori himself is such a banger way to end the season, and it does leave you excited to see where we go next. Number 41. Boredom. I just really have fun with this episode. Just like the baseball episode, this is definitely on the lower end of JJK episodes, but I just really enjoy it. This episode serves as the introduction to Todo and Mai, two characters that I like and I think are actually pretty interesting, despite one of them being particularly fraudulent. Anyways, the Todo vs Megumi fight is a really fun fight, and it gives us some fun character moments as well. Mai vs Nobara is also pretty fun, as these two just hit each other with roast after roast. The way this episode ends with the images of the people that Mahito transfigured in the theater is a great little cliffhanger that sets up for our next arc really well. This is overall just a fun watch. Number 40, The Origin of Blind Obedience. This is a fun introductory episode into the Death Painting arc, but when you look at this episode next to the other two episodes that are also a part of the Death Painting arc, it's night and day. This is a solid setup episode though. It actually does a really good job setting up the mystery behind Yasuhachi Bridge. I also like the Megumi lore we get in this episode. We hear of his sister Sumiki throughout the series, but this is the first episode where we actually learn more about her. Of course, her entire lore segment is in the second part of this episode, but nonetheless, this is great setup for that eventual lore segment. I also just find the scene of Nobara trying to turn Megumi's head really funny. It was a scene that I didn't even remember, but was super enjoyable on my second viewing. We also get some ominous imagery from Mahito and the death paintings in this episode. The cinematography goes unnecessarily hard here. Overall, it's your typical JJK setup episode. Solid moments all around, but nothing really special. Number 39. Pandemonium. This episode is really just the final calm before the storm before shit really hits the fan in Shibuya. Gojo is finally sealed and the teams of sorcerers head inside the veils. We get discussion between the curses where they choose to be on Team Kill Yuji or Team Summon Sukuna. This is the final setup episode of Shibuya, but it does a really good job of keeping you invested for the majority of the runtime while managing all of the different moving parts and characters of Shibuya. We get content from pretty much every major sorcerer team, Gojo, the curses, Mechamaru, and the twins. The best part of this episode is probably the discussion between the curses about Yuji. It gives us a little more insight on the motivations of our villains in a natural way, and splits them up to go cause chaos around Shibuya. It's some great writing. The episode ends with Yuji, Megumi, and the Shiesty Sorcerer heading out to go take down the Veil. Another typical JJK setup episode, but with more standout moments than the last. Number 38. It's Like That. This episode is an interesting case. I've said many times in previous videos that Mechamaru vs Mahito is my favorite fight of the series, and I do stand by that, so you might be curious as to why one of the episodes containing the fight is so low. Well, first off, this episode serves as a prelude to the fight, whereas most of the actual fight takes place in the next episode, which you'll see way higher up on the list. The second reason being that the first 10 minutes of this episode is focused on Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi just doing their own thing. We see Yuji's former classmate Ozawa trying to get his number, and this sequence is completely fine. I do like scenes like this a majority of the time, of the characters just being characters, but this is among one of the weaker moments of the series of that phenomenon. I do like what it does for Yuji though, and the part where he remembers her name despite her appearance change is just classic good guy Yuji. However, the prelude to the Mechamaru fight in the back half is what carries this episode to as high a rating as it has. I just love this fight so much, but I'll save my gushing for when that episode comes in the ranking. But overall, this episode is just a fun little casual time. Number 37, Kyoto Sister School Exchange Event Group Battle 2. This is the part of the ranking where I start thinking the episodes are pretty damn solid, but not at the elite tier yet. And that's a high praise considering we're at number 37. This is probably the biggest Mechamaru episode barring Evening Festival, so you once again might be questioning the placement of this one. I do love this episode, but when you look at the rest of the episodes on the board, I just can't justify putting it any higher. Also, the majority of this episode focuses on Panda vs Mechamaru, which is a fight that I think is just okay. And we don't get around to Mechamaru's character moments until the very end of the episode, which is easily the highlight of the episode for me. I actually really enjoy the lore we get for our two combatants in this one, those being Panda and Mechamaru. We learn about how Panda is essentially Masamichi Yaga's son, and he's a cursed corpse with 3 cores for a heart. However, the Mechamaru lore is the best part of the episode for me, with the scene at the end of him dreaming of stepping out of his tub and seeing his friends being one of my favorite moments of Season 1. A solid installment into the Kyoto Goodwill arc. Number 36, Kyoto Sister School Exchange Event, Group Battle 3, the Girl Boss episode. This episode really shows off the female cast well, as we get strong content from Maki, Nobara, Momo, Mai, and Miwa, with Maki shining above the rest. On top of having some fun-ass fights, this episode gives us much-needed exposition on the Zenin clan and the backstory of Maki and Mai, and it's very effective. Mai and Maki were both among my favorite characters coming out of Season 1, and it's basically due to this episode alone. Surely they'll cook in Season 2. I mean, Maki certainly cooks, right guys? Anyways, the fight between Maki and Mai is one of the standout moments of not only the episode, but the entire season. The duality between perspectives of the Zenin sisters is what makes this interesting. Maki hates the clan and did everything in her power to leave and stick it to the clan, whereas Mai also hates the clan, but is content with staying and is frustrated that Maki left her behind. This is such an interesting dynamic to have between siblings, and it comes to a head in their fight. Maki catching Mai's bullet is such a badass moment to end their fight, but the emotional ending of Mai crying and calling Maki a liar is such a bittersweet ending to the episode. It almost immediately stops the hype of the fight and sends you right down to reality, even getting a little emotional for a character like Mai, who we've seen is an asshole for a majority of her time on the show. This episode is an underrated one for sure. Number 35, Seance. This is definitely the weakest pure fighting episode of the Shabuya Incident, but it's not without its banger moments. Ino gets to show off his technique fighting against Ogami, and that directly leads us into the episode's best moment, the return of Toji, as he is seanced by Ogami. That leads us directly into a weird and disturbing flashback of Ogami and her gang using their technique throughout the years. Coming back to the present, we see Toji absolutely annihilating Ino, which is just rather unfortunate. After that, the rest of the episode focuses on Yuji and Megumi versus Awasaka, which is another fight that I think is just okay. I like seeing Megumi and Yuji jump jutsu somebody, especially because we actually rarely see them fight together in the series so far. I also like how the fight ends with Yuji defeating Awasaka with a little baby punch. It's a fun ending to this one. Number 34, After Rain. This is what I think of when I think of the quintessential setup episode of JJK. The first half of this episode revolving around Yuji and Sukuna is amazing. The scene of Sukuna setting up their binding vow is very effective, and we still don't quite know what he's cooking yet, and that's what's so good. We still have a hanging thread of something that's happened in episode 6 that hasn't been paid off yet, and that's such great writing, making us wait for the inevitable moment someday when Sukuna takes over. That scene ending with Sukuna proposing a fight and just immediately one-shotting Yuji is also a perfect way to end the scene, it being funny and scary at the same time. The rest of the episode is really good as well. This is our first little hints of Shibuya as we get our first look at the villains of the series and their future plans. The scene of Gojo teaching Yuji about cursed energy and assigning him on his first little task is another funny scene, but a great one. And then ending this episode with a cliffhanger for a Gojo fight? This episode has exactly everything you'd want from a setup episode. Number 33, Hidden Inventory. I love the Hidden Inventory arc, but I can't push this one any higher than the 33 spot. This is easily the weakest of the 5 episodes involving Gojo's past, but I still really love this episode. I really do enjoy spending the first 10 minutes here with Utahime and Meimei, learning a little more about them as they haven't had some proper shine in the spotlight yet. They lead perfectly into the introduction of Gojo, Geto, and Shoko as they arrive to save them. The flow and pacing of this episode really is phenomenal. That's probably my biggest compliment of this episode. Every scene just flows so well into the next, and the scenes don't overstay their welcome or end quickly either. The best scene of this episode is probably the basketball scene between Geto and Gojo. I love how this discussion between the two basically bookends this arc, as the two completely switch their stance by the end. It's some of my favorite writing of the entire series. I also just love the moment of all the knives flying at Gojo as he just sits on the phone with no reaction. It just perfectly encapsulates the character of Gojo. This is one of the most fun episodes of the series in my opinion, and it ends perfectly with the menacing introduction of Toji. Number 32, The Shabuya Incident. You'd think the episode titled after the titular Shabuya Incident would be more eventful than it actually is, but you'd be wrong. This episode is more of a setup episode to the Gojo fight between the Disaster Curses, but it does that job perfectly. We also get Yuji versus the Grasshopper Curse in this episode, which is a fight that happens. I didn't feel any type of way about it, however, I did forget how absolutely fucked the Grasshopper Curse gets. I did not remember this until the rewatch. While that scene is pretty cool, everything involving Gojo and the Disaster Curses is the real meat of the episode. I really like how they handled this fight. Heading into this fight, most viewers will probably scoff and get ready for another Gojo ass whooping, especially because we've seen Jogo versus Gojo and it did not go well. The show knows this, so it lets us in on the Disaster Curse's plan, that being to simply stall out Gojo for 20 minutes until the prison realm is ready. It's actually a really interesting approach to take, as they have us follow the plans of the villains rather than our hero, but it works really well and makes the following episode even better for it. Also, the final line of this episode from Gojo just goes insanely hard. Number 31, Dull Knife. Another one of the highlights of early Shibuya is this episode. This is the episode where Nanami beats the life out of Haruta multiple times. We see Nobara versus Haruta in this one, another fight where Nobara loses. It's actually kind of funny how the only fight she wins clean in this series is the one where she hits Black Flash. She truly gets cooked 99% of the time, and it's low-key embarrassing. I understand that it's her overconfidence that lands her in these places, but you'd think she'd stop at some point and realize that, but no. And then that gets her killed later. The scene of Nanami saving Nobara from Haruta is the highlight of this one, as he one-shots Haruta multiple times and takes away a good chunk of his miracles. Side note, Akari is the unluckiest person ever in this episode, getting her ankle sliced, punt kicked in the stomach, and then getting her ass stabbed a bunch. This is some true suffering builds character type of stuff, and if this happened to me personally, I'd awaken a curse technique on the spot. But that's just me. Number 30, Curse Womb Must Die. This episode is almost the precursor to Shibuya in a way. It's the first episode of the series where we see just how truly screwed everyone is fighting a special grade without Gojo. Nobara is knocked out of action almost immediately because, as we discussed earlier, she's on quite the hot streak. Yuji loses a hand and would have died if not for Sukuna taking over, and Megumi just straight up dips. And I mean, fair enough, that is what Ijuchi told them to do. Something I forget about this episode is the fact that Sukuna literally uses Malevolent Shrine on the Finger Bearer, but it's at a point in the show where we don't actually know what a domain expansion is, so we kinda just gloss over it. This episode also actually has some good comedy in it, which is surprising as this is also the episode where we see a mom cry for her son, and we later see that son cut in half.
What'll we do? What'll we do?
It'll be fine.
I like this episode a lot though. It shows just how dark the world of JJK can be and how dangerous it is to be in over your head against a high level curse. Number 29, Small Fry and Reverse Retribution. The next 3 slots on the list are all episodes from the Versus Mahito arc, an arc that I very much enjoy as I think it presents the best character writing in Season 1 across the board. Yuji, Nanami, Junpei, and Mahito all shine and get a lot of great moments for their characters here. This is the first episode of the Versus Mahito arc, and it serves its purpose as an introductory episode pretty perfectly. This is also a very good introduction to Junpei. We get a sense of his moral compass early, and we see that his life at school is extremely shitty, and so it makes sense that Mahito is able to manipulate him and his worldview. The fight scene introducing Nanami's technique is also pretty fun, but then that fight scene goes into a sad territory when you realize they were fighting transfigured humans the whole time. Good episode. Number 28, Idol Transfiguration. Another solid entry in the Versus Mahito arc. This one ups the ante as we see Mahito in combat for the first time, and we get an in-depth look at his technique, the namesake of the episode, Idol Transfiguration. The Nanami vs Mahito fight is a good fight, but it just gets completely outclassed by their rematch just a couple of episodes later. I also find it kinda crazy that had Yuji not stepped in with the flyhead debacle, Junpei would have fucking iced his teacher. Kinda insane. Anyways, this episode ending with Nanami entering overtime is a fun little cliffhanger, and it unveils another layer of Nanami that we hadn't yet previously known, and that's always fun. Number 27, Narrowminded. This episode yet again continues the escalation of the arc, and in some fantastic fashion. We see Yuji and Junpei bond and start to become friends. He goes over to his house for dinner, and we meet Junpei's mother, who is Junpei's rock. It sure would be a shame if something bad were to happen to her before the episode is up. We get the ending of the Nanami versus Mahito fight from the previous episode, which is great, and we get another naked Mahito appearance. The scene where we see Junpei's mother die is genuinely shocking, as you don't really expect the show to kill her off almost instantly, and she dies brutally as well. This event sends Junpei off, and Mahito successfully manipulates him into thinking that one of his bullies planted the finger, so Junpei takes his newly acquired curse technique to the school to exact some vengeance. Yuji shows up to stop him to end the episode in high-octane fashion. Number 26, For Myself. This is one of the episodes of the show that I actually think is pretty underrated. I didn't really care much for this one on first viewing, but I actually really like this episode now. First off, I genuinely forgot that Gojo vs. Sukuna was in this episode and not the premiere, and seeing the intro to Gojo and him instantly showing us just how cool and strong he truly is the best possible introduction to the character that we could have gotten. The second half of this episode revolving around Yuji's initiation into Jujutsu High with Masamichi Yaga is also really good. I actually really like this scene. It is very cookie-cutter anime, yeah, but that doesn't mean it isn't good. It's a very generic, heroic scene, but hey, I like it. My only real issue with this one is the glossing over of Yuji's occult gang. They are hospitalized from the curses at the school. Yuji basically goes and sees them, says a doctor will fix you up shortly, and then leaves. And his occult gang was never seen or heard from again. Kind of funny how quickly these two were dropped, but hey, this episode is still pretty good. Number 25. Black Flash. This is our first large-scale battle episode of the series. Everyone is here versus Hanami. Megumi, Inumaki, Kamo, Maki, Yuji, and Todo all get their licks in against Hanami. This is also the first episode where Yuji and Todo team up to fight, and it's as great as we all hoped it'd be. We also learn about Black Flash this episode as Todo teaches it to Yuji. There's not really a lot I have to say about this one besides the fact that the fights in this episode are just really damn good. This is one of the first episodes where Mappa reminds us why they're goated at animating fight scenes and just animating anime in general. The one take of Todo and Yuji fighting Hanami on the roots is just peak JJK, what can I say? Number 24, Assault. This episode basically serves as the tutorial for domain expansion, and it's done in a natural way during the Jogo and Gojo fight. This fight further proves just how strong Gojo is, as he absolutely schools Jogo multiple times throughout the scuffle. However, where this episode gets good is when we get into the domain expansions. Gojo goes to grab Yuji to teach him mid-fight, and I just want to say that I think this shot of Yuji is just really funny. So after Gojo brings Yuji to the battle, on cue, Jogo pops his domain expansion, Coffin of the Iron Mountain. What a cool domain. I sure hope it doesn't get... oh wait, it got overtaken. Gojo takes down his blindfold for the first time of the series and pops Infinite Void in return, and the visuals here just go off. This is the first moment of the show where I was wowed by the visuals. This was perfectly done. Gojo ripping off Jogo's head is done in such a visually stunning manner, and it's just so damn cool. This episode ends with Hanami stepping in and saving Jogo, and the introduction of Mahito. Number 23, Fluctuations. From this point on in the list, I can confidently say that all of these episodes are 8 out of 10s and up. These are all great episodes of the show, starting with this one, Fluctuations. The first half of this episode is Mei Mei and Wee Wee dealing with the smallpox deity, which is an underrated sequence. This sequence is another one with amazing visuals. I forget how cool this domain looks and how well done the sequence is, and helping that are these continuous badass shots of Mei Mei. I sure hope this character doesn't do anything heinous in the next couple of episodes that will make me change my view on her entirely. Anyways, this is a very well done battle sequence, and the bird strike that ends the fight is super cool. The second half of this episode is Nanami, Naobito, and Maki versus Dagon. Naobito is absolutely bodying Dagon until Mr. Domain Merchant pops his domain and starts unleashing his sure hit effect of Shikigami. Even then, we see Naobito hold his own with Falling Blossom Emotion until Dagon starts hard focusing him. Megumi then pops in with his domain, beginning a tug of war and stopping Dagon's sure hit effect. Then, the episode ends with the perfect cliffhanger of Toji entering in through the hole that Megumi opened. The perfect oh shit moment to end this one on. Number 22, Hidden Inventory 2. Hidden Inventory 2 is naturally the second episode of the Hidden Inventory arc, and it greatly builds upon its predecessor. We get to meet Toji more in depth, and we see a little bit more of his plan to kill Rico, but we still don't fully know what he's cooking. Speaking of Rico, we also get to meet her in depth this episode, and it's kind of perfect. I do think Rico in her 2 episodes of the show stands out to me as one of the best written characters of the whole show. Her transition from a cocky brat ready to assimilate with Tengen into just a wholesome kid who wants to live her life is super well done, and the impact she leaves on the story as she goes is still felt to this day. The episode also has one of the best musical moments of the show. The music that plays as Gojo yaps his way through his technique and attempts to hit a red for the first time is amazing, and it's the perfect way to end this banger episode. Number 21, Right and Wrong Part 2. Ah yes, the Nobara death episode. I will start the segment by continuing to slander Nobara as she really heads back into the war zone of Shabuya just to get murdered in front of the boy Yuji. On a real note though, this is a great episode, although I do still have some problems with it. I don't hate this death as much as I did before, not even close, but that doesn't mean my criticisms of how it's handled pacing-wise don't ring true. The flashback in this episode is way too long. I think the flashback is good, and ending it with the chair metaphor actually got me a little teary-eyed on the rewatch, but 10 minutes on this flashback is a bit excessive. I also think this flashback comes way too late into Nobara's story. We see her backstory in her first appearance and her last, so we finally get a full understanding of her character literal seconds before her head explodes, and I'm still not sure if that's the best narrative choice in the world. However, her death scene itself, it's still incredible. The moment of the Mahitos running past each other is the biggest oh shit moment of the series so far, and hearing the music get distorted and then eventually drop out of the mix entirely after that moment is just impeccable sound design, and it makes this moment so much more. Then, of course, ending the episode with Nobara's iconic line that life wasn't so bad before she dies is a heartbreaking moment. A more mixed episode for me, but the good outweighs the to put it this high up on the list. Number 20, Metamorphosis Part 2. It's insane that we get an episode with this high of stakes and this intense right after the climax of the arc, but that's exactly what happens here. Yuji finally defeats Mahito, but Pseudo-Geto waltzes right up and says, "Not so fast." Luckily for Yuji, he has backup in terms of the Fraud Squad, Kyoto School. Pseudo-Geto, being naturally frightened at the appearance of one Kasumi Miwa, forces him to use his strongest attack of Uzumaki on her. In all seriousness, I low-key kinda hate the Miwa stuff in this episode. She is easily the worst combative sorcerer in the series, and her landing a hit on Pseudo-Geto would be outrageous, but seeing her this motivated and at her lowest, fresh off of her amazing last scene with Mechamaru, just to get absolutely dunked on by the show here, it does make me sad. Besides that, this episode is absolutely fantastic. Choso returns here, declares Yuji his brother, and fights Pseudo-Geto in a fight that does not need to go anywhere near as hard as it decides to go. We get to see Yorame in action for the first time, and we see their ice technique. And I almost forgot to mention the biggest part of the episode, aside from the ending, the death of Mahito. I think Mahito's end is fantastic. He and Pseudo-Geto have always wanted to snake each other. Mahito lunges to try and kill him, but Pseudo-Geto sees it coming and absorbs him. A perfect way for the curse born out of lying and betrayal to go out by getting betrayed himself. However, this episode does end with the appearance of my wife arriving in Shibuya and asking Pseudo-Geto once again his type in women, which is a callback to an episode you'll be seeing much higher on the list. Number 19. Accomplices. Now this is an example of a finale that cooks. This episode is mainly just the fight between Yuji, Nobara, Eso, and Ketchizu. It immediately has high stakes as Yuji and Nobara get poisoned almost immediately. However, I love the way that Nobara spins this against Eso and Ketchizu, using her technique to play chicken with them. I also love how they use Eso and Ketchizu's brotherly love against them to get the victory. They hurt Ketchizu so badly that they force Eso to release his technique to try and save him. They also get the badass moment of hitting dual black flashes, giving Nobara her only feat of the series. The slander will never stop. This is pretty much the best finale you can have for a season 1 of a show like this. You get a really cool fight where the main characters shine, and it wraps up everything really nicely as you leave the seeds for a season 2. I don't have a lot to say about this one. It's just pretty damn good. Number 18. Curse Womb Must Die 2. This is one of 2 episodes in Season 1 that I'd consider to be a Megumi-centric episode. This episode gives us a lot to digest. We saw in the previous episode Sukuna easily dispatch a special grade curse, and now in this episode, we see him toying with Megumi in a fight, continuing to show just how above the rest of the Jujutsu world he really is. The fight between Megumi and Sukuna is the first fight of the show where the animation truly shines. We get long, bombastic one-takes and quick character movements, and it truly shows you what the show is capable of. This is also the spawn of Potential Man, as we see Sukuna tell Megumi that he's talented, and this begins Megumi's inner turmoil across the season as he tries to live up to the sorcerer he knows he can be. We also have Yuji's death in this episode as he takes over Sukuna to save Megumi, even knowing it'll result in his death. This is the first episode of JJK that truly hits, and I'll always love and respect it for that. Number 17, Tomorrow. You know it's going to be a good episode when a domain expansion is popped before the intro plays. This is a great episode for all 3 of our big players. Mahito, on the verge of death, awakens his domain expansion and uses it to trap Nanami inside, intentionally excluding Yuji because of the risk that comes with touching Sukuna's soul. After that, we get some Nanami backstory, which might lead some to think that this is the end for him. We see his time working a real job and how it led him back to Jujutsu High, and this is a great sequence. Right after that, we cut back to the present, but before Nanami can be killed, Yuji breaks into the domain, and this causes Mahito to inadvertently touch Sukuna's soul, and Sukuna ain't happy about it. Sukuna punishing Mahito for this is just awesome and one of the best moments of Season 1. I also love the underrated scene of Mahito talking to himself after the fight is over. His foreshadowing of attempting to break Yuji's resolve is so sinister, and it's a great scene. We then go from that to Yuji vowing to kill Mahito and never lose again. It's the perfect contrast to end the episode on. Number 16, To You Someday. One of the best episodes of the series when it comes to character writing, and I'm a sucker for good character writing. However, this episode also has 2 banger fight scenes to go along with its amazing writing. We get Yuji versus Junpei, which is a good fight, but it's elevated so much by the writing. The moment of Yuji letting Junpei stab him with moondregs is so interesting, and it speaks volumes to who Yuji is as a person. Mahito strolls on up and transfigures Junpei right in front of Yuji, and this is where the episode enters the elite category. The scene of Yuji begging Sukuna to help him, only to get denied, is just so rough. Then we get this insane animation to go with Yuji finally breaking and telling Mahito he's gonna kill him, and it's so damn cool. The ensuing Mahito and Yuji fight is pretty good as well, but it's the storytelling and progression of the characters that makes this one so special. Number 15, Jujutsu Kaisen 0. Ah yes, JJK 0. Not going to talk about this one for that long since it's not really an episode, but this is where it stacks up on my list. The movie is great, the Ghetto Gojo dynamic is awesome as usual, and the introduction of Ogotsu is goated. But let's just move on to our top 14 episodes. Number 14, The Origin of Blind Obedience 2. This is the point in the list where the episodes became extremely hard to rank. I genuinely love every episode from this point on, and the spots could fluctuate heavily. Anyways, this episode is awesome. This is the episode where Megumi gets to shine. On first watch, I honestly didn't like Megumi that much. Then this episode rolled around and he immediately shot up on my list. The growth of Megumi here is fantastic. We get flashbacks of numerous times throughout the series where Megumi played it safe and didn't take a risk. Then we immediately cut back to his struggle against the Finger Bearer, and he pops a goddamn domain expansion and gets some of the coolest animation of the entirety of Season 1 and even the entire series. This is also where we get the rest of the Sumiki backstory, which gives more character to Megumi and raises this episode even higher. Another episode with both a great fight and exceptional character work.
When it comes to women, what's your type?
I'm glad you asked.
Number 13, NonStandard. NonStandard comes in at number 13 on the list, despite it being the best episode of Season 1. That's right, the top 12 is all Season 2, and Season 2 is 23 episodes. That means that more than half of Season 2 is filled with S-tier episodes. Anyways, Non-Standard is incredible television. This episode introduces Boogie Woogie to the audience, which is easily the coolest curse technique in the entire show in my opinion. And if that wasn't enough, we also get our first tag team beatdown from Yuji and Toto, as their fight with Hanami takes place for a majority of this episode. And if you thought one cool curse technique reveal wasn't enough, don't worry, because Gojo breaks down the veil in this episode and unleashes a hollow purple for the first time in one of the coolest scenes of Season 1. This episode truly is hype personified, an amazing viewing experience. Number 12, Evening Festival. Now this placement is shocking to even me, the honored one of Mechamaru Glazing. Yes, this episode does feature my favorite fight of the series, and the best content of my favorite character in the entire show. So why does it only come in at number 12? Well, the fight takes place for the first 15 minutes of the episode, and that I love. However, after the fight is over, the last 8 minutes or so is the prologue to Shabuya, showing us the veils being lowered, the teams, and Gojo entering the veil to end the episode. Now all of this stuff is genuinely good as well. However, when stacked up against the next 11 episodes, all of which are jam-packed with fights just as good as the Mechamaru one with better story moments than the beginning of Shabuya, it can't help but fizzle out around this spot on the list. Even though it didn't break the top 10, I still absolutely adore this episode. I've mentioned multiple times in multiple videos how much I love Mechamaru vs. Mahito, and I'm gonna make a video about it at some point, so I'll save my thoughts for then. But just know that this episode is amazing, and I love it. Number 11, Fluctuations Part 2. This episode starts in the coolest way possible. Toji vs. Dagon is another one of my favorite fights of the entire show. I mean, almost every episode from here on out has a fight that I adore, because JJK fights are just so damn good. Toji coming into the domain and just soloing Dagon is peak. What more can I say? This fight not only has awesome music playing throughout, but so many cool moments as well. Toji mowing through the fish, sharpening Playful Cloud, and ending the fight by breaking Playful Cloud and slamming it straight through Dagon's forehead is badass. Now if that wasn't an adrenaline-inducing start, Jogo pops in for a visit and literally cooks Nanami, Maki, and Naoto in one of the most shocking scenes of the show. We get no time to breathe between fights, and we see two characters we love get destroyed right in front of us in a way that almost glosses over him. It's crazy. The rest of the episode revolves around Sukuna's return as Jogo and the twins both feed Yuji some fingers, enough fingers to summon Sukuna temporarily. He murks the twins in a scene that's low-key upsetting, as they did not deserve that shit, despite being mini jujutsu terrorists. Nobody really talks about how tragic the twins are as characters, and I think we should fix that. Anyways, this episode ending with Sukuna challenging Jogo to a duel is the perfect capstone on this one, setting up the following episode to be an even better one. Number 10, Shabuya Incident Gate Open. I'm a simple man. We get Gojo Ghetto content, and I am seated. This episode fully revolves around Gojo versus the Disaster Curses and the ensuing Prison Realm shenanigans. This is another one of the fights in the series that builds on itself in such a cool way, as each encounter builds up upon the last. Hanami gets capped in this episode right away, setting the tone on this fight to be one of extreme danger for the other curses in the room, as if it wasn't already extremely dangerous. I like how Hanami's death genuinely sends Jogo into a frenzy. It's very cool to see the bad guys genuinely care about each other. Usually a lot of the evil characters in media lie and betray each other, and that's still present here as we saw with Mahito and Pseudo Ghetto, but it's also refreshing to see the Disaster Curses have a genuine love and care for one another as they react tragically to finding out one of them has died. Anyways, Jogo enters Demon Time and begins heavy stalling, and right when you think he's cooked, Mahito arrives, crowding the entire space with transfigured humans and backing Gojo into a corner right when he was getting the upper hand. This forces Gojo into his 0.2 second domain expansion, which is badass as hell. This ends up working and he mows through every transfigured human in the room. After that, Gojo stands, out of breath, before Ghetto surprises him with a greeting. This is a top 5 character moment in the entire show. Seeing Gojo drop his guard almost instantly at just the sound of Ghetto's voice, and it being his downfall, is just so heartbreaking to watch. Pseudo Geto revealing himself as a curse piloting Geto's body is also just the saddest way to end the episode. This is another one of those episodes that kind of just has it all. Number 9, Thunderclap Part 2. Now, I understand this is a hot take, as this episode is almost universally praised as a gift from God, but hear me out. First of all of the episodes at this point in the list are basically separated by nitpicks, as all of these episodes are fucking fantastic. This episode in Thunderclap Part 2 has the most nitpicks for me. Now, I have 2 major nitpicks here. The first is the animation. Now listen, despite this being one of the best animated things I have literally ever seen, it is disappointing to a degree. The fact that the animators only got to animate around 30% of their vision for this episode sucks. This episode looks so damn good, and to know that it could have looked even better if MAPPA didn't overwork and rush their animators is just frustrating. My second nitpick is the narration during Sukuna's domain expansion. During my second watch of this episode, I was greatly enjoying it, and as Sukuna's domain expansion rolled around, I was ready to bask in the badass moment that it is, and then Mr. Narrator comes in and kind of broke my immersion, explaining Sukuna's domain. I had forgot that they explained his domain expansion right before it happens. The narration is 100% necessary for a first time watch, but on a second watch, it's more of an annoyance as it intercepts the moment. I also still do think this fight is slightly overrated. That doesn't mean I don't think it's good though, not even close. I still think this fight is amazing, just not on the level as the rest of the fanbase thinks. Nonetheless, despite my complaining, this episode is actually incredible. Sukuna's domain expansion is one of the best moments of the entire show, and the visuals in this episode are some of the best you'll see in anime in general. A true once-in-a-lifetime episode. Number 8, Hidden Inventory 4. This episode kicks off right after the heartbreaking ending of the previous one, and we jump right into Toji vs. Geto. I honestly don't think this fight is that crazy, but it's not bad by any means. It's just one of those fights that you forget about because there are so many other good fights. I mean, it literally gets outshined by a fight later this same episode. Toji wrecks Geto and calls him a monkey, and I sure hope Geto will definitely not remember that and or adopt it into his vocabulary. We see Toji deliver Riko to the Star Religious Group, and we get some lore about them, but then we get the Honored One versus the one who left it all behind, round 2. Gojo is cracked out of his mind. He's on the trip of a lifetime, and Toji is just standing there watching it all unfold in front of him. I mentioned this in my Hidden Inventory video, but I love how Toji dies because he goes against his morals. His ego was too strong, and he wanted to kill the strongest even though he wouldn't have gotten paid for it. We see Gojo land his first ever red, and then his first ever hollow purple right after, and the episode actually ends, however, with a post-credit scene, where Gojo and Geto meet back up and discuss whether to kill the religious group or not. This is a chilling final note that sets up for the next episode, which you'll see later on the list. Number 7, Right and Wrong Part 3. This episode just hits for me. This is one of the episodes that pulls so many different emotions throughout the course of its runtime. Starting with a flashback sequence of Nobara, Yuji, and Megumi laughing together, only to cut to her dead body. Mahito's voice actor then proceeds to give the performance of a lifetime during the Black Flash scene, and Yuji is completely broken at this point, and about to be killed when we hear a certain signature clap. Toto's arrival is genuinely one of those moments where everyone cheers when watching. If I watched this show in a theater, I would expect an endgame level pop for something like this. Toto gets Yuji out of his funk and they proceed to start fighting Mahito, but right before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, we cut to Miwa. This is her final scene with Mekamaru, and one of my favorite scenes of the entire show. It is the perfect conclusion to the Mekamaru character, and it's so tragic, but so sweet at the same time. We cut back to the battle at this point just in time for Toto to hit Black Flash for the first time, and one of the most batshit insane animation sequences you'll ever see, which then transitions into the iconic 120% panel to end this amazing episode. Number 6, Redscale. It's genuinely insane to me that this doesn't break the top 5 on the list. This episode is literally just 22 minutes of fighting, and it's so damn good. First of all, the music in this episode is popping the fuck off. The track appropriately named Redscale is such a damn banger. The fight between Yuji and Choso is an interesting one. A lot of the fights throughout JJK are very grandiose and large scale, however this one isn't. It's just two characters with bad blood, pun intended, going at it, and by the end it turns into a big ass brawl in a cramped space. I like how this fight has so many different stages. It starts super fast when Choso shoots piercing blood at Yuji on sight. We then get to the part where Choso asks if his brothers had any final words, and Yuji tells him that they cried, so Choso goes off and starts gaining the upper hand yet again. This is when Mekamaru steps in and tells Yuji to run into the bathroom to try and catch Choso slipping. Yuji gains back the upper hand when the water fucks up Choso's blood attacks in the bathroom, and you finally think things are gonna go his way until Choso pierces his liver with a bloodshot. It's at this point that the track Resolve starts playing and you think it's time for Yuji to win. It's his turn to gain the upper hand and we have a motivational track blaring in the back. Plus, there's no way our main character loses this fight at this stage in the arc, right? Wrong. The music cuts out and Yuji just loses. A perfect subversion of the audience's expectations. Then, if that wasn't crazy enough, Choso goes to kill Yuji and gets the memories of Yuji as his brother, ending the episode with this super cool transition. Number 5, Hidden Inventory 3. Coming into this video, I thought this was going to be taking the number 1 spot, as I just heavily resonated with this episode, and it was the one I came back to the most. This episode is another one of the ones with both elite character moments and fights. I like how we see Gojo mature as a person in this episode. We see him being kind to Riko, somebody he views as weak, and this is fascinating to see when at the beginning of the arc we saw Gojo clowning on Utahime for that same reason, and arguing against weak people to Geto. He lets Riko live out her final days in peace in a sequence that tears me up every time. The aquarium scene is just so damn beautiful. We then transition to 2 days later when the bounty is up, and that's just when Toji strikes. The fight he has with Gojo here is also interesting as Gojo completely fucks up and underestimates his opponent, showing that while he has matured as a person, not so much as a fighter. That brings us to the ending of the episode, and this final scene with Geto and Riko might be my favorite scene of the show. These are two of my favorite characters, and this conversation is just so damn good. Geto offers Riko the choice to assimilate with Tengen or not, revealing that he and Gojo had already set this plan in motion days ago. Riko accepts the offer, giving an incredible, heartwarming, and emotional speech as the ending music begins to play, only to be cut off by a gunshot from Toji, killing her instantly, in genuinely one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the show. Probably the best ending to an episode of the show so far for me. The sinking feeling you feel is just unmatched. Number 4, Thunderclap. What happens when you put my second favorite fight and my third favorite fight in the same episode? Well, you get the number 4 spot on the list. This episode is basically just those two fights, starting with Megumi vs. Toji and ending with Sukuna vs. Jogo. Megumi vs. Toji is a super one-sided fight, but my god did they fucking cook with the animation here. I mean, we got Kung Fu Bunny for fuck's sake. They did not need to go this hard. This fight is awesome, but the ending to it is perfection. Toji realizes he's fighting his son and takes over for a moment, and asks Megumi what his name is. When he hears that it's Fushiguro, he kills himself, satisfied that his last name isn't Zenin. For a character as despicable as Toji, this is such a perfect and surprisingly wholesome way to end his character, and it feels deserved. It isn't some ending that justifies his actions or makes him super redeemable. It just ends his arc perfectly and satisfying. We then go from that to Sukuna vs. Jogo, my second favorite fight of the whole show. Once again, the animation here is breathtaking, and we get my favorite frame of the entire show in this battle, as Sukuna cleaves through some buildings. I almost forgot to mention that the namesake track Thunderclap is my favorite song on the soundtrack, and that song in the background of this fight is adding to the sinister and catastrophic nature of the battle. After Jogo sets up for his maximum meteor, we see Sukuna doing a little bit of trolling with Panda and Kusakabe, in a scene that is so scary that it's kind of funny. It breaks the tension, but is still a super scary scene at the same time. After the meteor misses, we get a standoff between Sukuna and Jogo, firepower versus firepower, and Sukuna wins. we cut to the afterlife where Jogo of all people gets a sympathetic death scene, with Suguna telling him he put up a good fight and he's strong, which brings a tear to Jogo's eye. And once again, this is a satisfying end to the Jogo character. This episode gives two villains two incredible fights and wraps up their characters so nicely. It's refreshing to see the villains get such good wrap-ups to their characters. They genuinely get as good of endings as the heroes. Number 3. Right and Wrong. Probably the saddest episode of the entire show. This episode makes you feel it all. It begins with Nanami's incredible final sequence, which might be my favorite scene of the whole show. This is a show that knows how to wrap up its characters perfectly, making their deaths satisfying and meaningful. Minor characters and villains alike, shocking deaths and expected deaths alike. Nanami mows through the room of transfigured humans, intercut with visions of him happy in Malaysia. And this scene just rips your heart out. Nanami is still here, half burned, missing an eye, mowing through a room full of enemies, trying to save as many people as he can, just for a chance at the euphoria and relaxation he deserves, and you, deep down, know that he is not gonna get that chance. Mahito sneaks up behind him, and Yuji walks in right at that moment. Mahito relishes in this moment, excited at the opportunity to break Yuji's will by killing Nanami right in front of him. And that's when Nanami speaks up and says one of the best lines in the entire show. Itadori, you've got it from here. Mahito kills Nanami and the music kicks in as Yuji runs forward on a mission to kill Mahito. We get round 1 of Yuji versus Mahito here, and it is awesome, with the moment of the two walking towards each other with the wall closing in being a standout. The episode then ends with Nobara showing up to fight cloned Mahito, which is rough when you know what happens next. Number 2. Metamorphosis. The climax to the Shabuya Incident. This episode wraps up the fight between Yuji, Todo, and Mahito, and my god is it just incredible. We get some good fight stuff, but this episode really starts cooking when Mahito decides to pop a domain expansion, learning from Gojo, and in his awakened state, attempting a 0.2 domain expansion, and it works. It lands on Todo due to him being caught off guard, and he has to chop off his hand because of it, and this unfortunately ends his boogie woogie technique. Or so we think. Mahito hits Todo with a black flash, and that leads us straight into the mind of Aoi Todo. This sequence is so well done, and it just gives me so much faith for a certain character in Season 3. Todo claps Mahito's hand, a final hurrah, and his final boogie woogie, swapping with Yuji who hits a black flash on Mahito. Mahito responds by entering his final form, and we get the final duel between Yuji and Mahito. Yuji has to hit a black flash to win, and his brother sets him up for it perfectly. Todo comes in for the assist of the century, faking a boogie woogie with his stump, successfully distracting Mahito for a moment and allowing Yuji to hit that black flash and win the fight. But the episode doesn't end there. We then get one of the coldest sequences in anime history. Yuji walks down a terrified Mahito, and when I tell you this is the most satisfying shit I've ever seen, I mean it. To see such an asshole like Mahito finally get his comeuppance and face the consequences of his actions is so gratifying. Except Pseudo-Geto appears and asks Mahito if he wants to save him to end the episode. Now obviously, this doesn't come to fruition, but choosing to end the episode on this note is actually diabolical, making us think for a whole week that Mahito was actually gonna live. The reaction videos to that moment were just gold. Carmen really spoke for all of us that day.
No! My god, if that motherfucker doesn't die, I'm gonna lose it!
Anyways, this episode is incredible, but it fell just short of number 1. But what did it fall short to? Number 1. Premature Death. In a show known for its incredible battles and action sequences, an episode without any of it comes out on top as my favorite. As I've stated many times this video, I am a sucker for good character writing, and this episode has the best character writing of the whole show. This episode chronicles Geto's full descent into madness, and it's fascinating to watch. We start this episode 1 year after the Rico incident, and Geto is in rough shape. He's been going on solo missions, because Gojo has gotten so strong that he too gets solo missions. With this separation from his best friend, his mental deteriorates even more. That brings us to the shower scene, a masterclass in sound design. We hear the sounds of the shower slowly turn into the sounds of the clapping of the Star religious group. This is what Geto has been hearing and thinking about all this time, how that moment has haunted him, and this is where he first begins to snap. He has a quick chat with Haibara where Haibara mentions that he can see the good in people, and Geto asks him why he's sitting next to him then, affirming that Geto doesn't see himself as a good person anymore, which is just really sad. Especially with the context of the start of the arc where he advocated and stood up for the weak. We meet Yuki proper for the first time, and I just love this character. Her conversation with Geto is riveting, and she accidentally plants the idea of genocide in his head after they talk about potential ways to rid the world of cursed energy. This even further drives Geto down his dark path. Yuki's parting words that they found another star plasma vessel is so depressing as well. This basically means that Rika would have been able to live her life as normal had they saved her, and once again, Geto is not taking this well. We then see that Haibara has died, which fucks Geto even more, as somebody who saw him as a good person and was a good person themselves just died for no reason. Finally, Geto reaches his breaking point. Assigned on a mission to a village in the mountains, when he sees the villagers holding two girls captive because they can see curses, he finally snaps and kills everyone there. This gets him suspended and assigned the death penalty, with Gojo as the executioner. That brings us to the breakup scene. Probably the best scene in the show for me, basically tied with Nanami's final stand. Each sentence that these two say is so cutting and perfectly written, and the music to go along with it is everything. Geto says his iconic line about Gojo, and we wrap up with two final scenes from our two protagonists of the arc. Geto sets up his cult, and Gojo finds Megumi and talks to him about the Zenin clan. We finally cut back to the present, and Gojo has a smile on his face. The perfect ending to the arc, and my personal favorite episode of Jujutsu Kaisen. So that was my list of every JJK episode ranked from worst to best. I'm sure you guys have thoughts, so put them down below. I'm excited to see what you guys think. If you put a list of your favorites, I'd love to see it, but I hope you all enjoyed. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more, and as always, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful day.